What's good, YouTube? It's time for another Magic Man review. Today's book is a really good one, really good, and I highly recommend it. Like a lot of the history books I've been reading and been doing reviews on, it can be a little bit of a slug sometimes. You gotta power through these books. But if they're interesting, like this one is, um, you're really going to learn some good information. Now, this book is called "The Indian Slave Trade." Okay, and it's by Alan Gallay. Is the 2003 winner of the Bancroft Prize. Okay, now this book is really good at destroying a lot of the narratives, and that's what I really like. I like knowing the truth. Okay, and a lot of the stuff, a lot of the narratives that we're given these days is just total BS. Total BS. Okay, now this book will shatter a lot of the prevailing wisdom about the history of the American Indians. That's what I'm gonna refer them to. That's what I grew up calling them. Um, uh, a lot of it's going to shatter it totally. This whole concept that before the Europeans arrived, that the Indians were living in peace and being one with nature. That's just rubbish. It really is. It's not true at all. They were fighting each other in some of the most brutal fashions you will ever hear of. Okay, and you'll read about it in this book. Okay. Um, Most of the Indian nations weren't really Indian nations per se. Most of the times they were a large Indian nation, but a lot of other smaller Indian nations would ally themselves. So they're more like Indian confederacies. Okay, a lot of it was very back and forth. Sometimes they would go with different nations, and they were always looking to improve their lot. Mostly it was for self-defense or conquering other Indian nations. Um, One of the things I did know about this, and this is really about the book is focusing on South Carolina or the Carolinas and the slave trade that went on in the Carolinas. I didn't know that the English colonies were in competition with one another. I thought they would kind of, be tightly knit. It wasn't really like that. The Carolinas, um, the people who were living in the Carolinas, the governor, they were in competition to get alliances with Indian nations. They were in competition with Virginia, the Virginia colonies. They wanted all to have that protection because they were outnumbered when they got here, and they even for a while they were very outnumbered. So they really kind of relied. They were competing with each other. I didn't know that. Um, and the thing was, it was a free for all. Okay, they were saying the narrative is that the Europeans came over here and conquered the Indians and stole their land. Okay, that's what you'll always hear. That's yes and no, but it was more like a free for all. You had Great Britain, Spain, and France. So we're dealing mostly with we're dealing with North America right here. They were fighting each other, and they were allied with different Indian nations, and France and England had their own allies, and they were all fighting one another. So it was white people killing white people, Indians killing Indians, and it was back and forth. They would break treaties, they would make treaties. Sometimes they would be with this European power, and they would, sometimes they would be with another European power, and they're always trying to one up each other. They're always trying to get trade rights, hunting grounds, all that stuff. That's what they were all about. Improving their situation in life. Kind of a survival of fittest, dog eats dog, and really interesting facts in this book. Um, what One of the reasons the Europeans made all these alliances with the Indians, because I mentioned before, they were outnumbered, like 100 to 1. Okay, and a lot of it's been made saying, "Oh well, the Indians died of diseases. The Europeans brought the diseases over," which is true. Yes, they did. That did happen, but the Europeans weren't immune from those diseases either. They didn't live to the ripe old age we do now. I think the life expectancy back then was like 35. That was the average life expectancy. So they died of smallpox just as bad, but they had experience with it, so they knew how to quarantine. different stuff. This doesn't really touch that much in this book. This is mostly dealing with the slave trade. Okay. Now, when I'm talking about the slave trade, I'm not specifically talking about the African slave trade. That was legal. Okay. What we're talking about in this book is the Indian slave trade. That was illegal. The European monarchs wanted to set up colonies desperately in North America, and they outlawed the Indian slave trade for the most part. Sometimes they would let it happen, sometimes they would turn a blind eye, but for the most part they outlawed it because the Europeans they didn't want to piss off the Indian nations that they were allied with, or the ones that weren't allied with, because they were outnumbered so much that if the Indians had decided to go to war with them, they'd been toast. They wouldn't have stood a chance. Okay, and there's a lot to be said about, another narrative. Oh, the Europeans had superior weapons. They had, gunpowder. Wow. Okay. So what? You've got a musket. It takes you all this time to reload a musket and to shoot them, right? Guess what? In the time that it took you to reload, to fire the musket and reload it and fire another shot, it's plucking off 3 or 4 arrows. You're loaded up with arrows by the time, you're messing around with this, old flintlock musket, And it was just, it was brutal, brutal fighting, okay? The Indians wanted muskets and rifles because it was a status symbol, okay? So, oh, look at me, I got this European musket. I'm special, kind of like, I don't know, Air Jordans are. I mean, you can go get any kind of shoe, but you want the Air Jordans because it's a status symbol, Same thing. Firing a bow and arrow is much more practical than reloading a musket. Have you ever seen one of those things? They had to put a little spike in the ground to rest it on there because it was so heavy, and you had to line up. And after a while, the Indians found out what they were. They weren't scared of them. They knew how long it took to reload them. The Indians weren't stupid, okay? They were brutal, but they weren't stupid, okay? Nor were they naive, nor were they, peace with one another and Mother Earth and all this stuff. I'm sure they had their spirituality. But no, they were engaged in slavery before the Europeans even landed, okay? And you will read in this book just how brutal the Indians were to one another. It's just crazy. It's crazy. But the slavery really picked up when the Europeans got here, because that was one of the things they wanted. They wanted to be able to ship off Indians to, the Caribbean where they couldn't escape and work them to death. And then they would import African slaves into the Americas, so they had no place to run. And when there was runaway African slaves, the Indians would help track them down and bring them back to collect money. Okay, so they weren't innocent, they weren't naive, and this whole thing, like Bambi or Disney. No, it wasn't like that. Humans are going to human. Like I said, if you've been watching these videos, they're going to do some messed up stuff. All right. And also the whole term, like Native American and indigenous, that's the one they're saying today, indigenous. You'll learn in this book that's not true either. Okay? Because when the Europeans landed on the east coast of what's now the United States, a lot of the Indians were living on the Mississippi. They heard about, there's these Europeans here, and they've got all these wonderful goodies. They got steel weapons, they got this, they got that, they got textiles, they got alcohol, they got this and that. Let's go over and trade with them. And they went over all the way from Mississippi to the Carolinas and killed a whole bunch of other Indians on the way there, and took other people's land, other Indians' land, just so they could get to the Europeans. So they weren't indigenous to that land, were they? No, they were living by the Mississippi River. Okay, so a lot of it destroys the narrative. Just destroys it. It's not true, okay? Some of the stuff, yeah, it's true, but they blow it out of proportion and they don't ever put any perspective on it, okay? And when I'm talking about I'm talking about schools, colleges, the media, the internet, a lot of Indians don't even know their own history, okay? They'll tell you all kinds of good stuff, but they'll leave out all the bad stuff that they did too, all right? And another misconception is the Indians didn't own the land. That is utter BS. So, how can you own the land? The land belongs to everyone. It belongs to, the great Sky Father. Crap. Just utter BS. They were killing each other for land before the Europeans got here. They would fight each other tooth and nail for hunting rights because they needed those hunting rights to survive. They needed that land to cultivate for their own farms, which they had. This whole thing that they're hunter gatherers, that's a bunch of crap too. They had towns. They didn't, the Plains Indians lived in teepees, okay? But on the East Coast, the Indians lived in towns. They had their own towns, they had their own cities, and they hunted the deer and the bear, and they lived off it. That was part of what they need. They needed that to survive, and they killed each other for those hunting rights and that land. And they would push off other Indians from that land and just kill them, straight up. So this whole peace pipe thing. Oh, you'll learn about the real meaning of a peace pipe in here too. I'm gonna kind of leave that as a little nugget, for all the normies and conformies who think they know it all. Yeah, you'll find out. Read this book. Read this book. You'll even see on the cover of the book, right? Look on the cover of this book. You'll see a European right here fighting an Indian. You'll see more Europeans, but guess who he's fighting right beside? They're fighting right beside other Indians. And who are they fighting? Other Indians who happen to outnumber all of them. Okay? That's that's the way things went back in those days. And the paradigm gets destroyed. Okay? Now, myself, I knew, first of all, that a lot of stuff was a bunch of crap. Because, through my own history and research and stuff that I've looked up in the past, like, I'll give you an example. Most of y'all have eaten Mexican food before. Go to, like, a Mexican restaurant. They have these murals up on the walls of, like, pyramids, Aztec pyramids. And they'll have the beautiful Indian princess being held up by the Indian prince. And, oh, they love so lovey-dovey. Crap. Utter crap. Okay? A more accurate depiction of that would be the Indian princess being held down by 4 other dudes while the Indian prince cuts out her heart with an obsidian knife. Okay? That's what really happened. But you can understand why they don't put that up on the walls. They're trying to sell people chimichangas, okay? Not exactly the stuff you want to advertise to the public, all right? But you kind of, you have to really get past the programming. That's really one of the reasons I set up my channel, and I wanted to share some of the things that I read with the public, because a lot of people they don't teach you stuff in school. They teach you this, these people were evil, these people were good, It's just gray. People are people, humans are humans, And they did a whole bunch of different stuff. You wouldn't really think, like, how in the world did they think this way? How could they do this? It was dog eat dog. Every man for himself. You got 35 years of life. That's it. You're going to get as much as you can, as fast as you can, by any means necessary. That means screwing somebody over, taking his land, killing them, whatever. Indian, European, it does not matter. You're going to do it to survive, to get your leg up. Because if you don't, somebody else is going to kill you and take your stuff. That's just the way it went. Kind of hard for us to relate in modern times how this stuff happens. But read this book. It'll destroy the narrative. Okay? Lots of other books like this. But there's a lot of good information out there. You just got to go and find it. All right? You got to look for it. It's out there. There's whole libraries full of good stuff for you to read. Just like this. And I can't recommend it enough. Once again, The Indian Slave Trade. All right, people, till next time, I'm out.